Well, we're coming to the end, and it's been especially trying for Bill. The doctor's kept secrets from her, and things are about to get very real. We start with the doctor, still blind, despite Nardal's best efforts, and using the sonic glasses to have some rudimentary vision. He can see things, he can register when there are people around, but he can't read stuff, and he can't really register faces. And we find out who or what is in the vault. Turns out it's Missy. She gets executed again, this time by not Daleks, but dedicated galactic executioners. Only the doctor futzes with his equipment, or with the equipment, and Missy's just knocked out. Now, the doctor plans to hold his oath fulfilled and guard Missy's body in a vault for the next millennium. But she doesn't necessarily have to be dead. Luckily, the doctor won't have to do it alone, because before the late, great River Song died, she sent her diary and a restored Nardal to help the doctor, to protect him. And, as Nardal quickly informs the doctor, he is the only one who is legally allowed to kick the doctor's tuchus, should he need to do so. But that's not the main crux of the story. The main crux is the doctor gets an email on the sonic specs which reads one word: extremis. Turns out the email is from the flippin' Pope. And he and a cadre of padres, yes, I just thought that up, and I stand by it, come in to pay a visit to the doctor during the school's off hours. Apparently, there was some sort of ancient forbidden text in a language that was lost and was recently retranslated. But before we get more into that, we need to pay a visit to Bill, who brings a lovely young woman named Penny home, well, to Bill's caregiver's home, who's still unaware of Bill's dating preferences. Unfortunately, before Bill and Penny have a chance to do more than sip tea, the Pope shows up, says something in Italian, and poor Bill has to send Penny away, and then berate the doctor. Do not bring the Pope into my apartment when I'm on a date, is basically what she says. But unfortunately, she's needed. And so, the TARDIS travels to the Vatican, where we find out that the people who've translated and read the text have all offed themselves. Except for one, and he's missing. No one knows why. So, Team TARDIS travels to the bowels of the Vatican Library, where stuff the church doesn't want us to know is located. Probably having to do with JC's siblings, and wife. From Dogma and the Da Vinci Code. Anywho, they find a priest in a cage where the forbidden text is located, and a translation on a laptop. But before anyone has a chance to say much to the priest, who says he sent it, whatever it is, and apologizes before running off, and we quickly hear a gunshot. See, he was packing a pocket pistol, which he used to break the lock of that cage. Unfortunately, the cardinal who was sent to guide them disappears. Some weird portal of light opens up, and when he goes to investigate, this desiccated hand grabs him and he vanishes. Meanwhile, the doctor sits down in the cage and uses a machine to borrow a bit from his future regenerations in order to temporarily repair his sight so he can read the stupid text. But before he has a chance, several what can only be described as mummies in monk robes come to meddle with the doctor's plan. And the doctor has to run from these meddling monk-mies, I've waited so long to call them that, in order to avoid the fate of the cardinal that led them down here. We also find out that one of the early bishops was a woman, and the doctor knew her. But that's a little side joke. Anywho, while the doctor is running for his life and trying to read a forbidden text, which might cause him to off himself more than once, depending on how many regenerations he has left, Nardal and Bill find another light portal and follow it into a hub. A spot that's in shadow, surrounded by monoliths that are projecting light portals to other areas. One portal leads to the Pentagon, and after realizing where they are, the duo quickly excuse themselves. Another leads to CERN, the Large Hadron Collider, where the scientists are boozing it up and celebrating the end of all things. It seems they're going to off themselves en masse. They've got dynamite strapped to their tables. Without a doubt, the worst lunchroom I've ever seen. And when Bill and Nardal reveal that they haven't read the texts, because the CERN people did, and that's why they're offing themselves. So they explain. They tell the duo to think up a random set of numbers, and to say those numbers every time one of them taps on the table. And when this happens, everyone, and I mean everyone, guesses the exact same number every single time. Meaning that there's something off with reality. But unfortunately, the timer that the CERN people have set up is about to count its last. So Bill and Nardal head back to the hub before everything goes boom. And Nardal has put it together. Why everyone could say those numbers at the same time? Reality. All of reality is a simulation. Yes, the characters of Doctor Who have realized they're part of a TV show. No, that's not it. In reality, it's a simulation these meddling monkmeys are running scenarios to see how best to conquer Earth. And Nardal finds out the hard way that everything is a simulation when he puts his hand into the shadowy area between the monoliths, and it pixelates and vanishes, and his last words before he disappears are, "I'm not real!" And eventually Bill finds where the doctor went with the laptop containing the translation. Turns out he's in the White House, where the president has taken a bottle of pills. And the doctor confirms that it's all a simulation. And while Bill is trying to wrap her head around things, she gets deleted by one of the meddling monkmeys. Yes, I'm going to call him that, period. And when the simulation doctor tries to get some information, the monk sort of dodges the question, because that's not the real doctor. Only they made the simulation too well. He's every bit our doctor, and before the simulation can end, this doctor does what anyone facing imminent destruction would do. He called for help from the doctor. Having set the sonic specs to record their last conversation, he sends that conversation to the real doctor. And so we get the battle for Earth against meddling monkmeys. In the real world, after having been told about Simulation Penny by the doctor, Bill decides to meet the real Penny and get to know her. He even tells her about the whole thing with the simulation. But instead of the Pope and a cadre of padres getting into Bill's apartment, well, Bill's caregiver's apartment, a bunch of soldiers show up, forcing Bill to cut the date short again, and having to go off with the Secretary General of the UN, who takes Bill to the President of the World's private airplane, where they've brought the TARDIS in order to reinstate the Doctor as president so he can help solve this crisis. Because everyone knows about the monks now. Well, they know something is going down because a 5,000-year-old pyramid has just appeared on a border in Europe, well, the Eurasian border, and the Russians, the Chinese, and the Americans are all starting to converge on that spot in order to figure out what the heck's going on. Anyway, the Doctor, much to his chagrin, picks up a representative from the Chinese and the Russians and the Americans, and together they try to suss out what's going on. First, the Doctor decides to try a show of force. Unfortunately, it doesn't work because the pyramid has special tractor beams that prevents any weapons from being launched at the pyramid. They disable a nuclear sub from the Russians and airplanes from the Americans, and teleport the crews of those ships into the pyramid, where they walk out unharmed. And then After everyone breathes a sigh of relief, the meddling monk knees offer a parley. They declare that the world is about to end and humanity is going to become extinct along with everything else on the planet unless they give control of humanity and the world to the monks. Now, at first everyone thinks, okay, maybe we're going to be the cause of all this. So, everyone puts their prejudices aside and says, nope, we're not going to nuke the world. Only that doesn't stop the countdown the monks have initiated. It seems whatever's going to happen isn't related to war. And when the UN guy tries to offer up the world, the monks say that he's got to make the offer out of love. Because without the love, for some reason, the offer turns deadly. And since the guy only offered out of fear, well, he gets turned to ash. So, with a little help from everyone searching online for potential world-ending threats, after the doctor puts all the top secret information on the internet in searchable format, he finds a lab experimenting with bacteria. And unfortunately, due to a series of random events, the bacteria gets out into the lab. And only a woman with dwarfism is the only survivor. Her partner literally gets liquefied. So if that gets out, everyone's goop. The doctor tries to figure out a way to destroy the bacteria before it gets out through the ventilation system, which isn't equipped to handle it. So it's going to release it all into the atmosphere. Luckily, he realizes he can just burn the lab from the inside and cauterize the infection. And unfortunately, this puts the doctor in a no-win scenario. You see, he's got to get out before he's incinerated along with the bacteria. Only the lock on the door that leads to safety, it's a 4-number combination with oversized tumblers that he can't actually read. He knows the code, he just can't put it in right. And unfortunately, Nardal got exposed to the bacteria, so he's been incapacitated. If he were fully human, he would have been killed, but luckily, he was just laid out. But after the rest of the military guys get vaporized because they're trying to offer up the world out of strategy, Bill makes an offer. Give the doctor his sight back so he can save himself. Much to the doctor's chagrin, the monks are able to accept the offer because Bill loves the doctor. We all do. And what wouldn't we all sacrifice for him? But she's not technically sacrificing. She knows that with his sight fully restored, he should be able to save the world. And as the monks give Bill what she wants and take what they have been offered, she declares, "Doctor, save my world." So, the doctor gets out, and the monks ominously declare that he will now see their world. And it's such a fascinating world. It seems the monks have been here since the first air-breathing fish crawled out of the ocean. They helped guide humanity into the modern age. They protected us from Daleks, Cybermen, Weeping Angels, and the like. And while some delusional fools think that they've only been here a couple months, well, 6 months, those poor people clearly need help. So, the monks, in their infinite wisdom, and with their spokesperson, the doctor, who now sports a very creepy smile, informs us that we're lucky to have the monks in our lives, and that we should be just doing what we're told and thankful to be alive. Only Bill witnesses some poor woman getting dragged out of her house in an Orwellian fashion because she knows that the monks have only been here a couple months. And the only reason Bill hasn't succumbed to the monk's charms and remembers the past as it actually happened is because she, every day, puts a bit of tea on her table and speaks with an imagined apparition of her mom, who's been given a proper face thanks to those pictures the doctor took way back at the beginning of this season. Eventually, Nardal shows up and gets a punch in the shoulder from Bill for taking so long to get in touch with her, because he was only laid up 6 weeks with that bacteria, and yet 6 months have passed. Eventually, they find out where the doctor is. He's aboard a big boat out in the harbor, a former prison ship. So they infiltrate it, almost giving themselves away, thanks to a lack of proper identification from Nardal. But thanks to the timely intervention of the monks, well, I should say distraction, they penetrate the inner sanctum and meet the doctor, who reveals that he's been working with the monks, allied with them, because humanity has made some pretty lousy choices. And thanks to the monks, humanity is a little bit more stable. And this pushes Bill over the edge. She was so sure he was a prisoner, but an ally? Heck no. So, she pulls a gun on him and pumps several rounds into him, prompting a regeneration. Who knows, maybe the next doctor will have some sense. Surprise! It's actually a trick. Those were blank rounds, and turns out the doctor has been secretly deprogramming the monk's psychic influence, and turns out the whole thing was Nardal's idea. And at that revelation, Bill threatens to pummel him, because she was scared out of her wits for no good reason. Well, they all had to figure out whether or not Bill was drinking the Kool-Aid, so I guess there was a good reason. Still, Nardal might deserve a love tap for that. Luckily, the doctor is a voice of reason and holds Bill at bay, sparing Nardole a beating. And so he informs them of the main plan. Figure out where the psychic influence is coming from and shut it down. But to do that, they got to get back to the mainland, which the Doctor does by piloting the prison barge right back into the docks, hopefully not killing anyone in the process. Sneaking into the lower area of the school where the Doctor set up shop originally, and getting into Missy's vault to talk to her. Because, like I said earlier, Missy's still alive and in the vault for 1,000 years. So, turns out, Missy's tussled with these monks before. And their weakness is someone sets up a psychic bond with the monks, and that allows them to project their false reality. Last time it was a little girl who Missy proceeded to throw in a volcano. But they're not doing that because this time it's Bill. Her declaration of love is what gave the monks their hold on the world. And unfortunately, the psychic influence would only fade slowly if Bill were to flatline. So that's going to be a different plan. The Doctor realizes that the statues the monks had everyone put up in every city are what's causing the psychic influence to be amplified. But there was also a hub which they then have to infiltrate, utilizing headphones and recordings of Bill speaking truth. Team TARDIS and the small cadre of soldiers that they've recruited break into the facility in the pyramid, which has been set up in the middle of London. And as they make their way through, they do manage to take out a couple of monks, but not without losing a couple people. Some get zapped. One gets his headphones damaged, so the psychic influence, which is concentrated at the hub, starts to affect him, and he has to get knocked out by Nardole. But luckily, the Doctor and Bill get into the hub and find a goat-faced monk me, projecting the false reality into a huge structure right above their heads. Funnily enough, the psychic influence is weak inside the room because they're basically in the eye of the storm. So first, the Doctor tries to use his mind to overcome the goat-faced monk's projections, and unfortunately, he fails. So, having realized this whole thing is her fault, Bill decides to tie up the Doctor and try to stop the goat-faced monk herself. And at first, it starts to override her thoughts, turning her into a conduit for the false reality. But then, the imagined images of her mom give her extra strength, and she's able to psychically overcome the monks without having her mind wiped. So ultimately, the truth gets out, the people rebel, and the monks turn tail. And unfortunately, no one remembers how humanity was able to band together once the truth came out. The doctor actually asks some passerby what the remains of the statue that they're sitting under was for, and she says, I guess it's like a movie prop or something. Humanity's ability to forget. But then again, when trauma hits the brain, it puts up safeguards to, I guess, guard against madness. So I blame that. So the day is saved. And Bill's earned a bit of a break in the form of an adventure. So, Team TARDIS travels to NASA, where a new satellite is getting clear images from Mars for the first time in ages. And thanks to the psychic paper, the Doctor and Bill are allowed to stay and watch the picture show. Although, it's kind of a weird picture. Near the polar ice cap in the north on Mars, there's a bunch of rocks, and they spell out "God Save the Queen." Which doesn't make sense because analysis says the images are over a century old. 2 centuries old, I think. Occurring sometime in the late 1800s. So the Doctor and Bill and Nardole head to Mars in the Victorian era. And they discover something amazing. But not before the TARDIS somehow automatically transports itself back to the present in the Doc's office, with Nardole stuck inside because he went to get climbing gear to rescue Bill, who fell down a hole. And separately, the Doctor and Bill make shocking discoveries. The Doctor meets an ice warrior who goes by the name of Friday and gets taken prisoner by a British officer with a pith helmet and a rifle and a red jacket, whole 9 yards. And said ice warrior named Friday is injured. His helmet's slightly damaged, one eyepiece is cracked, and he's missing his left eye. Meanwhile, Bill comes across an elevator and out steps, in a steampunk spacesuit, another British officer who is a little more warm than the first guy. And we find out that the second in command of this battalion, a whole bunch of British soldiers, found Friday when he was stationed in South Africa. His ship was damaged, and Friday made an offer. Help him get his ship off the ground and back to Mars, and they can mine for precious materials, metals, gems. Basically, this guy was giving Mars and its resources, what little there was left, to the British Empire. And the British soldiers are very haughty about it. They're British, so Mars is part of the Empire. We also meet the first in command of the battalion, who for some reason the second in command doesn't really like, for some strange reason. We find out that the spaceship that got them all to Mars crashed when it, instead of properly landing. So now they're stuck using one of Friday's ship's weapons as a drill to mine for resources. But their supplies of food and drink are running low. So if they don't get that ship off the ground, they're doomed. They've got plenty of air thanks to Martian know-how, and they're in a cavern. But they can't last forever. Even though they're still keeping a stiff upper lip for Queen and Country. And yes, this is the same Queen we met in Tooth and Claw. Anywho, eventually the soldiers find a cavern with weird crystals lining the walls. They seem to be hollow, but we can't tell for sure. Because in the center, there's a sarcophagus containing the Martian Empress. And while the soldiers want to plunder it for all it's worth, the doctor pleads for caution. Unfortunately, these soldiers are extremely greedy, including one who revealed that the second in command, who's repairing the ship for the second time, he's farther along than he let on. His plan is to take a select few back to Earth and reap the rewards. So one guy has a black officer who is looking forward to getting back to his fiancée, stand guard while he pries these precious looking stones off the sarcophagus. Unfortunately, that wakes up the Empress, who quickly starts defending herself against the terrified British officers until Friday shows up and informs her of the situation. They've been asleep for 5 millennia and Mars is dead. But she's confident that she can get enough of her warriors woken up. Those are who are behind the crystals, by the way. So that they can retake the planet and maybe colonize a new planet. Like perhaps that blue one that always loomed over their heads. Hint, hint. Now the Doctor sees 2 very violent factions about ready to annihilate one another. Well, the Ice Warriors have an edge. Their weapons can literally crumple a human into a ball. And not in the comical cartoon way either. The I'm gonna be sick kind of way. But anyway, he tries to get a parlay going, but the skittish, trigger-happy soldiers and the overly proud Empress, full of blood and fire, she's not having it. She and her warriors are going to retake Mars and then go from there. Meanwhile, the human soldiers reveal a secret about the leader of the expedition. Turns out he took the job because he was hung for cowardice and desertion, and this expedition was supposed to be a fresh start. The second in command, he kept it a secret and extorted money off the guy. But with the truth revealed, the Doctor, Bill, the first in command, and eventually Friday, who was laid up after a cave-in, were all locked up. Well, the humans are. Friday shows up later. But anyway, they're locked up while the second in command takes command properly and plans to use the improvised drill to fight the Ice Warriors. And during one of the battles, he shoves the black guy in front of one of the Ice Warriors, who kills him. Just to make their plight all the worse. I think in Doctor Who, when you hear about a potential good ending for a character, that means they're doomed. It's a bit of ominous foreshadowing. Eventually, the second in command decides to abandon his men and show the same level of cowardice that his predecessors showed, ironically. Excuse me. And when the Doctor tries one last time to make a parlay, the jerk dons that steampunk spacesuit and takes the Empress hostage. His plan is to leave them all behind and save himself, forcing the Empress to help him work the spaceship. But amazingly, the first in command, who ducked out when the shooting started, he ended up showing a bit of bravery, taking out the cowardly second in command and surrendering to the Empress. Simply asking one thing, well, two things. Number one, that his fellow soldiers and Team TARDIS get spared, and number two, well, and its planet, of course, and number two, that he gets a proper soldier's death. And while the Empress promises both, she says he's not dying today. She admires his bravery and willingness to die for a good cause, and so recruits him to help rebuild Martian society elsewhere. And eventually they do make contact with the outside galaxy, none other than Alpha Centauri, the big eyeball creature without a gender. They make contact and welcome the Martians to the rest of the universe. So happy ending for them. Meanwhile, Nardal manages to get the TARDIS back to Mars, with help from Missy, who's out of the vault and experiencing feelings of remorse for all the people she's killed over the years. So that's a thing. Also, in order to set this whole thing in motion, the Doctor, Bill, and the first in command build the very message that got them there in the first place. So that's a nice little timey-wimey loop. And after Bill and the Doctor get home, she decides to have a contest with the Doctor. She knows for a fact that the Ninth Legion of Rome, which apparently disappeared before it got a chance to get home. Is still in Scotland somewhere. So, after we meet a little girl who's listening near some ancient stones to some strange ethereal music, much to the chagrin of her brother, the TARDIS lands in ancient times in Scotland, and Bill goes off looking for her Roman soldiers. But instead she finds a local girl who's memorializing her family. But before Bill has a chance to say condolences or something, she snaps a twig, alerting the girl, who charges at her like a flippin' rhinoceros, swords drawn. Luckily, Bill is saved when she falls into a pit where another Roman, a young black man, who most likely hailed from Romanized Egypt, and Bill realizes that aliens and humans that don't speak English do speak English to her thanks to the TARDIS translation matrix. Meanwhile, the Doctor and Nardal come across a Roman soldier that looks like it's been buried in a peat bog for a couple of centuries, only it's on the surface. It seems all the vitamin D and whatnot has been sucked out. This kind of desiccation occurs only when a body has been in the dark for a long time. And eventually, the Doctor and Nardal come across the remains of the Ninth Legion, slaughtered to a man. Or at least that's what it looks like. Of course, then they're taken captive by some more locals who are waiting for their leader, a woman named Kar, K-A-R, to show up and judge them, because they think they're Romans. But the Doctor, who is headed up to here, with people pointing swords at him, decides to speak as a parent speaks to a child who's been naughty, because they're in fact all children. There are one or two very old folks, but it's the kids who are in charge. And when Kar shows up, it's the same girl who chased Bill. So, after getting a little bit of a rhetoric about how bad the Romans are, and yeah, they were kind of jerks to everybody back in the day. And we find out that it was Kar who did something to cause the Legion to be destroyed. We don't yet know what, but we do know this: she seemingly unleashed a monster. And after the Doctor takes some popcorn from Nardal and casts it into the heath fire inside the dwelling they've been taken to, when it explodes, mildly, he and Nardal make a break for it. The Doctor hides in an old cairn, sort of a sepulchre-like structure that the locals have built. Meanwhile, Nardal gets recaptured, and the Doctor, upon seeing the sunlight hit the back wall of the cairn, is gobsmacked when it opens up to reveal a portal. And in the portal, these Lovecraftian dog-like creatures with tentacles. And before one has a chance to escape, the light goes away, and it's revealed that the doctor has been gone for 2 days. It seems there's some sort of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey thing going on, and there's a alternate reality which has managed to punch through a small spot in our world. And it seems Carr's ancestors built the cairn around the portal to try and keep it contained, but it has to open a little bit each day in order to prevent the whole thing from going kablooey and releasing a whole bunch of those creatures at once. It seems that's where she released the one creature which killed all the soldiers, and a fair number of her friends and family. So now they've got to figure out a way to get it back in the portal. Because as she declares, she's the guardian of the gate. Some sort of ritual combat that keeps the creatures contained, passing on from one generation to the next every half century or so. Meanwhile, Bill was able to get out of the pit along with the Roman soldier, who sadly gets devoured by the creature, but not before telling Bill where to find the remaining Romans. Unfortunately, she leads the creature right to them and gets injured. Luckily, she's cared for by the soldiers, one of whom takes a bit of a shine to her, although she informs him that she's not into men, and he's okay with that. Most of the soldiers are bi, so Captain Jack would have a field day here. Except for one soldier, another black guy, who only prefers men. Once again, Captain Jack, field day. But since he saved her life, he declares they're friends forever. So apparently these Roman soldiers aren't as big of jerks as they usually are. We also find out that these soldiers are barely adults, and they're disgraced because when the fighting and the dying began, they ran the wrong direction. So they'll probably face decimation if they ever make it back home. Eventually they find a tunnel which leads right into the house of Carr and her people. And so Team TARDIS is reunited, and the Romans and the locals end up in a Celtic standoff. It's like a Mexican standoff, but in Britain. Yet, thanks to the Doctor's presence and the TARDIS translation matrix, which works through him somehow, everybody can understand what everybody is saying. And Carr airs her grievances to the Romans, and the Romans are at a loss. It seems the locals sound like children, the Romans sound like children, and the Doctor quips, when everyone can understand everyone, everybody sounds like children. So, they put aside their differences and band together to lure the creature back to the cave, well, cairn, I should say, and trap it. But eventually, once the creature gets back through the portal, the Doctor reveals his final gambit. He's going to stay and fight the creature for who knows how many eons, while his next bout of regenerations runs out. Hopefully, by then, the creatures won't want this universe anymore because the stars will have gone out. But the Doctor is knocked over the head and carried out of the cairn because he's got a vault to guard. And besides, it's Miss Carr's job to fight the beasts, but she's not going to do it alone. The last of the 9th Legion will help her, taking it in turns, so hopefully enough time will have passed and the creatures will lose interest. So much to the Doctor's chagrin, they draw their weapons, start playing battle music, the very same music the little girl heard, and advance into the portal, which causes the whole cairn to collapse. And so, to this day, the Guardian of the Gate and the 9th Legion battle creatures from another reality. Meanwhile, it's revealed that Missy has been locked in the TARDIS. She's unable to control it, and she's unable to leave, and so she volunteers her abilities as a mechanic to help keep the TARDIS in tip-top shape. So it's kind of a repeat of the alternate 9th Doctor in the Scream of the Shalka, with him and the Master in the TARDIS together. And yeah, I couldn't help but notice the similarities of Roman joining forces with a Scottish woman to save the universe with the help of the Doctor. Yeah, I'm guessing the woman Carr is somehow related to Amy Pond. Because her brother, in fact, survived and vowed to keep his sister's story alive. Also, throughout the story, crows have been showing up and speaking. Actually speaking. And apparently, they stopped when people stopped listening, so now they just make that caw noise. Although it's revealed that, in reality, they're remembering the girl, Carr, and her sacrifice. And so we've come to the end of yet another bout of Doctor Who. When next we meet, the Doctor, in this form at least, goes on his final adventure, and we reach the end and the beginning. Until then, this is Mr. J signing out and reminding you, Celtic music is awesome, and never mess with a Scottish woman.